Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Writer's Workshop. So our topic tonight is how to write a book series. And our author tonight is the author of the Trading Heartbeats Trilogy and the Clumsy Little Hearts Trilogy. Please help me welcome Julie Navickas.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. How is everyone this evening? Doing okay? I'm impressed. It's 7 o'clock at night on a Wednesday, and you're all here and want to talk about writing. This is wonderful. Well, thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this since, I think, January. I was very kindly invited to participate in the local authors fair that was hosted here at Champaign Public Library. And we connected, and now here it is, July 17th, and I'm back ready to talk about one of my very favorite things in the world, which is writing books, writing novels. And I would imagine that's what you all are here for here today as well, because you are also passionate about the same topic. So I would make sure this is working here. I would invite you all. This is going to be so much better and so much more fun if this is more of a conversation than me simply just talking at you for an hour. So if you're comfortable with that, please, let's ask questions, let's talk, let's practice, let's work through anything that it is that you're thinking about. But I just promise you this is going to be way better than me talking at you for a straight hour. Is that okay? Okay, excellent. All right, I will go ahead and get started, and I will just introduce myself briefly here. My name is Julie Navickas, and I do come to you today as a traditionally published author. I do have 5 books that are currently published, and 1 is under contract to come out in November. I'll start by just showing that I love what I do, and I love that people think I'm good at what I do. I am an award-winning author. You can see some of the things that my books have been recognized with: a Literary Global Award, several BookFest awards, a Clarion Award, and I've also been a finalist with the American Writing Awards. Writing is very much what I do. Thank you, you're so kind. It's very much what I do for fun as my hobby, but it's also what I do for my professional career. But that looks very different. During my daytime hours, I work at Country Financial in corporate communication. So I write about insurance all day. So by the time I come home and my kids go to bed, that's my fun, creative writing time. So I spend my day writing, but it is a lot more fun after those evening hours begin. Here are my books. We started off by just kind of showing you that I have my first one is the Trading Heartbeats Trilogy. They're all contemporary romance novels. My first book published in August of 2022. This was actually a pandemic hobby for me. I was bored, I had some extra time to kill, and this was a creative outlet for me during the pandemic. So I started writing, and it turned into I Loved You Yesterday, which is my very first book, my debut novel that came out in August of 2022. And from that, I realized that that story wasn't over, and I had an opportunity to continue. So I wrote my second book in the series, I Love You Today, and followed it up with I'll Love You Tomorrow. See the theme? That's my first trilogy. And then I had such a good time with it, and I learned so much that I thought I'm going to keep going and I'm going to do something similar, right? But at that point, I've kind of learned a little bit more about the tricks and how to do it well. And now I have my Clumsy Little Hearts trilogy, which is also a contemporary romance series. So this one, my first book in that particular trilogy came out in January of this year. My second book came out recently on June 13th, which happened to be my birthday, so that was kind of fun to launch a book on my birthday. And then the final one will come out this November. So I'm kind of in the process of what that looks like right now. Let me tell you, that is a whole other ballgame, trying to not just write a book, but launch it and market it too. That's a lot of fun. But that's a little bit about me and who I am and kind of what my publishing journey looks like. I contract with Inkspell Publishing, which is a small press publisher based in South Carolina. I queried. I was looking for an agent, and Inkspell found me first. And I thought, what do I know? I had never done this before. I think I'll give it a go, and it has worked out very, very well. She's been very good to me, very kind, and I would recommend that to all of you. If you haven't thought about working with a small press publisher, that's a really great route to get yourself started. But that's a whole other topic. We are here this evening to talk a little bit more about writing a book series. And so if you're all willing, I would love to just know who you are and why you're here. I learned a little bit about that some of you are frequent visitors for the Writers Workshop, but if you don't mind, can you just tell me your name? What do you like to write? And why are you here this evening? Is that okay? Doesn't have to be long or fancy. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but it just kind of helps me know what it is that we're interested in. So can I put you on the spot first? Excellent, thank you.
So my name's Ryan Root, and I'm very new to writing. I've tried NaNoWriMo for many, many years.
It's hard.
Not done well, but I've tried sticking to it. Trying again this year, I like to write epic high fantasy.
Very good, excellent, nice to meet you. How about over here?
I am just coming to learn more about how this might work.
Okay.
How I might get started. I have some ideas, and I think that I'd like to do it as much as a series.
Excellent, very good.
I'm about 2.5 years into a cozy mystery magical realism, and I'm not published, but I've envisioned a series of about 6
Oh, wow.
books. I've kind of roughed out themes for them.
Beautiful.
So we'll see.
See how it goes.
About self-publishing, traditional. I have no idea what I'm going to do next.
That's a really hard question to answer. Well, wonderful. Congratulations to you. It's not an easy thing to do. So, very good. Yeah, it is fun.
I'm working on a novel. I'm wondering the thought process of making it into a series.
Excellent. So you can kind of see the potential of something growing. There's more that I can do with it. Isn't it kind of funny? I think sometimes you start writing a story and you don't realize what the potential of it can be. Very good. It's nice to meet you. How about I'll go up here, if that's okay.
Hi, my name is David. I'm actually not a writer. My COVID hobby is photography. I'm a little better at that than writing, but I like to put myself in the same space as other creators. I tend to learn a lot from that. So.
I love that perspective. Excellent. Very good. Here.
My name is Fanny, and my experience with writing was mostly in school where I would have to write, I will not, whatever it is I did wrong, like 100 times.
That's where you're coming from.
For me, writing looks a lot like jotting down whatever I'm feeling when I get inspired. But now I want to do it a bit more seriously and get into a habit of it. So I thought I would get started.
Excellent. That's wonderful. And that's beautifully said, too. Writing is absolutely something that if you're passionate about it, you find the time in your day to make it that habit. Very good. Nice to meet you. Right in front.
Hi, my name is Brittany. I am in the process of writing a children's book series.
Oh, lovely.
Based on my daughter's experience with the allergies.
Beautiful. Very good. Well, it's nice to meet you. Thank you for coming. Back.
Professionally, I write mathematics. Before marriage and kids and whatnot, I did short stories in fantasy and science fiction for
Awesome.
fun. After marriage and kids, I've got a couple of kids' books on disc that I have no idea what to do with.
Okay.
And I'm looking to get back into fantasy and sci-fi also.
Excellent. Very good. I like to see kind of the ebbs and flows of it, right? But still a creative outlet. Very nice.
I'm here to learn something.
I like that perspective. I'm here to learn something. Aren't we all? Well, thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. It's just like I said, just kind of nice to know where everybody's at and where we're coming from and what we can do to best use our time together this evening. So let's go ahead and we'll jump in. I have a couple of just ideas of what this workshop could look like. And like I said, if there are questions that come up or if there's, a left turn that we want to make and talk about something different, I'm completely open to doing that. I want to make sure that this time is valuable to you. But I was thinking that we would kind of learn and practice a little bit some of the techniques to execute a successful book series, right? Many of you have kind of thought about what you want to do after that first book has been written, like what does the series look like, what's the potential? We'll talk about some pitfalls, right? Things that go wrong, and we'll talk about how to make sure that is working. Oh, okay. So number 2, we'll talk about just some common pitfalls, so things that can go wrong or things that you can anticipate as kind of like that messy middle part. And then the third thing I thought we would just make sure that we have some tangible tips that you can take away. I don't know about you, but I've attended a million conferences, 1,000 different workshops, classes, courses, whatever they look like. And I can sit in a room for 3 hours, and I walk out, and then somebody asks me, what did you learn? And I go, I don't know, right? So I usually approach my courses from a very practical standpoint of when you leave this room, you have 10 actionable things that you can take with you and go home and implement. So I have 10 of them for you today, and we will walk through them. Are there any questions before we get started? All good? Okay. All right. Okay, I'm going to throw all of my actionable tips up here for you right up front, and then we're going to break it down and talk about them one by one. But when you're thinking holistically, right, about writing a book series, there are 10 top tips that I would offer you. First is putting the hook to your book in the most strategic location, right at the end of your first novel or your first book, whatever that looks like, right? Number 2, you have to pick an overarching conflict. There might be conflict that takes place in a singular book, but you want to think strategically about what that conflict is going to look like overarchingly between all of your books. Now, I write in 3s, that's just my comfort level, but I know many have also wrote in, 7, 8, whatever that looks like for your series. So thinking about that overarching conflict is absolutely imperative. Number 3 is world building. Your setting matters, and we're going to talk about that tonight. Number 4, pantser versus plotter. Is everyone familiar with those terms? A couple of you are nodding, some of you are not. Okay, so in the literary world, there are 2 pretty typical approaches to writing a book or writing a story. If you're like me, you plot everything out, right? Sentence by sentence, chapter by chapter, right? Whatever that looks like, you have a thorough outline of from my first page to my last page, what is that going to look like? That means that you are a plotter. You are simply plotting out what the plot is going to look like. There are also people in this world who are pantsers, which basically means they're going to open their laptop and they're going to put their hands on the keys and they're going to see what comes out. They're going to let that lead the story. Right? They may not have a specific idea, but they're going to let the dialogue and the characters and the plot take them wherever it is that they want to go. I'm not saying that there is one right way or wrong way. Both are very, very useful, I think, in different spaces. But if you're thinking about writing a series or a trilogy, it's probably in your best interest to give it a little bit of forethought. So we'll talk about plotting. Number 5 is about revealing backstories, right? If you have 5, 6, 7 books, you have a lot of real estate to slowly tell your reader what that person or what that main character is about. So you're going to give yourself the space to just allow for some of that backstory to come through instead of giving it all up front. Number 6, your secondary characters. They matter a lot. They are not simply space fillers. They're not there to serve a specific purpose. They're going to do something for your story as you continue. Number 7, crucial character arcs. One thing that I think is very important is you have to have a character arc, right? Your character wants something. They have to understand how to get that. Something's going to trip them up in the process, and they're going to grow from that experience, right? Their goal is going to change as they learn something about themselves. What's really important to know for a trilogy or a series is that there's 2 different character arcs at play. The first one is what happens in that first book, and the second one is what growth do they go through throughout the entire series. So 2 character arcs, and we'll talk about that. Number 8, central events. There's going to be one main thing that happens in your story that's going to define it and separate it from your second story, from your third story, from your fourth story. And I have all kinds of examples that I'm going to share with you too, so it'll make a lot more sense here. But central events, there needs to be one specific thing that happens in your first book that's very different from your second. Number 9, avoiding the messy middle. I don't know about you, but sometimes when I watch maybe a show on TV, and it's got 7 or 8 seasons, right? And you get to, I don't know, season 4, and it's just not as good as it used to be in season 1, right? That messy middle. Something happens in that space that we want to obviously avoid. So we'll talk about how to do that as well. And then number 10, tying it up in a little bow at the very end. Some tips and tricks to do that successfully. Sound good so far? Okay, excellent. I will just keep going. And like I said, if you have questions or you want to talk about something in more detail, please let me know. All right. I'll point out that on my slides here, I've gone through and I have looked at very successful book series, right? So you're going to recognize, I think, some fan favorites, some things from pop culture. Here we have the lovely Twilight series up here, right? We can all have our opinions about what's good or bad, right? But that is a wildly successful series, right? There is something that's happening there that was very well done. So you can pay attention to some of the series that I have up here. These are ones that are obviously successful, and they've kind of found the secret for how to do it well. So my first tip, put the hook at the end of book one. This is your make or break moment, right? And the reason that I say that is if you haven't hooked your reader at the end of that first book, they're not coming back for your second, which means they're not coming back for your third or your fourth or your fifth, right? So there's a very critical place that you have to make sure that you are hooking your reader in exactly the right spot to ensure that they're going to continue with you throughout the story. So when you're thinking very strategically, right, you want to make sure that you're maybe leaving just something unanswered, right? It doesn't have to be like a wild cliffhanger or anything like that. Not all readers are fans of huge cliffhangers, right? But just something that didn't quite get tied up nicely that's going to make your reader want to continue on. Now that's going to look very different for all of us in this room, right? So if you're writing a romance, right, like I do, maybe it was, I don't know, a love triangle, right? Well, when it's a love triangle, typically there's two characters that are very happy at the end of a book, and there's one that's not, right? That tiny little hook that makes the reader want to go, what happened to that guy, right? Something, whatever that looks like for your genre or for your story or your book, right? That's the critical place that you want to insert that to make sure that your readers or your audience are going to come back for the second. So end of book one is the most crucial place in the entire series. It's the catalyst for everything else that's going to happen. So if you can do that well, you're asking your reader to come right back. You've had some success there. So tip number one, that little bit, right, that hook that you want to bring your reader along, put it at the end of book one. Number two, right, overarching conflict. How many of you are Harry Potter fans here? Yeah, me too, right? I don't know how anybody doesn't enjoy Harry Potter, right? As a book, as a movie, it's all wonderful. But what this example does really perfectly is that it shows you that through each and every Harry Potter story, there's one central conflict that takes place, right? There's an overarching story, right? Good versus evil, Harry versus Voldemort, right? But what happens in each individual story? We'll start with the first one, right? The Sorcerer's Stone. What's the main conflict there? What's the story that's taking place? You all raised your hand. Said you were Harry Potter fans, right? It's been a long time, right? He discovers he's a wizard, absolutely, right? And the central conflict, right, is Voldemort comes back into his life, right? He wants the Sorcerer's Stone. And so that entire story is about Harry learning about the Sorcerer's Stone and then preventing him from getting it, right? Conflict number one, right? It sets the tone, right? And again, you want to learn more. Book number two, right? Chamber of Secrets. Does anyone remember what the plot is for that one? I'll give you a hint, it's about Chamber of Secrets, right? Chamber of Secrets, right? Special place in Hogwarts, right? Tom Riddle comes back, right, as his memory, right? And he's trying to take over, right? It was one of the Horcruxes that he left behind. Okay, I'll stop with the Harry Potter thing, all right. But you can see that each and every book, right? Every story has a specific plot, right? There's something specific that contributes, right, to the overarching story. And that's what I would invite all of you to think about too, is that you have to think about your individual stories, sure, but think long term. What are those individual stories that will collectively make it a whole? So number two, pick that overarching conflict and think about the smaller conflicts that take place in each individual story. Number three, world building. How many of you enjoy kind of thinking through the world that your characters are in? What does it look like, right? What does it feel like? What does it smell like? What does it taste like, right? World building is effective. And if you don't do it well, right, I guarantee you, your readers aren't coming back, right? I usually tell students that I talk to about this is to think about setting as an actual character in your novel. Treat it as a character. The setting should be getting as much detail and emotion and description as your actual main characters that you're writing about. If you haven't given your readers an exciting place to be, they're not going to want to continue to read, right? Your setting is incredibly important. It's what creates that world that readers are going to long to return to. Now I put in here, obviously this is a photo from Narnia, right? If you're fans of the Chronicles of Narnia. Let's talk about world building, right? That's a pretty good example of what a thorough world looks like. An exciting world, right? That people want to return to. It doesn't have to be magical, right? It doesn't have to be that, but it has to be equally as exciting. So there needs to be something unique, something special about that world that your reader is going to want to know more about. It's not just about the characters, right? It's where those characters are interacting. So world building effectively, it's what's going to help your story progress. And it's something that will carry, right, throughout everything. Okay, let me pause here for just a moment. We've gone through 3 tips. Are there any questions or things that you'd like to discuss further? Nope, okay, it's all right. We're going to be a quiet group. Oh, David, yes.
This is too time consuming, but could we possibly do a hypothetical hook for the ending of book 1 for multiple genres, like examples?
Oh, okay, that's a good idea. All right, well, I'm gonna open this to everybody, right? So I gave my example, right, from a romance novel perspective, right? A hook for me in a romance would be, right, if it were a love triangle, 2 characters are typically gonna have very happy endings. 1 is not. So for me, the hook is what happens to that other person who essentially lost, right? What is their story? How are they going to continue? That's just one example. But I know that many of you write in very different genres, right? Are there examples that anybody would be willing to share? Let me try to think of some too. Some fantasy writers?
So like from fantasy or like a battle type war story, I've used something like another enemy that's still alive. So at the very end, you reveal that, oh, wait, they're not quite defeated. So
Turns out the battle is not quite won, right? That's a really wonderful example, right? So for, things that are more like fantasy driven, you could use something like that to be very effective, right? The battle is not won, there is more that we have to do. Great example. Did I see another hand? Yes.
So what I'm doing so far is that after the crime is solved and they're celebrating at the end, the protagonist said, oh, I'm so glad that's over, I'm sure from now on it's just going to be clear sailing ahead. And then there's somebody, a character that's always kind of naysaying, and she's going to say something like, but is it really? And that's the last line of the book.
It opens the door, right? It gives that reader just that moment of, is it really, right? That's a great example, right? So for mystery, right, you solve everything, you think you have all the pieces together, and then there's that one person who makes you question if it's actually solved. Great example. Yeah.
This is an interesting point regarding mysteries in particular. Because it's really common in the genre. They don't seem to have an overall plan and plot. Like what links them together is the characters. Like I don't know if you've read Rex Stout's Nero Wolf series. He didn't even age those characters, and they span like 50 years.
Well, that's interesting.
And he's like, why did I not age them? I didn't want to.
I didn't want to. I guess that's a choice.
It's not like an overarching plot. It's
Interesting.
It's
Just a
like,
series of stories is kind of what it sounds like.
And it feels like if you've got an overarching, so like a good story generally has a beginning, and a middle, and an end.
Agreed.
Right. But the problem is if you end the story, then you've got to sell another one.
You do.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that's where series become so popular, right? Is from an author's perspective, you've spent the time learning who these characters are. You've built that world, right? And so it makes it a little bit easier that once you're familiar with those very important tools, you can continue on and find the new story. What's the new conflict? It doesn't necessarily have to be external conflict either, right? Maybe that character is experiencing some kind of growth. It's something that they're struggling with internally. So that conflict can look very different, right? From book to book. It's about that character's evolution. But that's an interesting point that you've made here, is that there's a specific author who I'm not familiar with, but they're just a series of stories, or?
Like the Agatha Christie Marple books?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I mean, does
I
Miss
see
Marple
some nods,
change
yeah.
at all, or is she exactly the same?
Is it a story that progresses?
Not,
No, it's episodic,
Oh, interesting.
yeah.
if you've ever read the Jeeves books too, they're very episodic. They're just,
Interesting. Well, I mean, I guess that's a different approach. When I think of the word series, I think of chronological, right? Something has to happen before another thing has to happen, before another. So very valid point, right? I'm approaching this, my perspective is from a series look of what progresses to carry the story forward. But I think what you're pointing out is something that's very valuable here, is that maybe that's not the approach for you and your story. It could be more episodic. It could be simply story to story with similar overlapping characters.
is there a difference in modern, all of the examples that I'm thinking of, though, came out, I think the last Rex Help was published in the 70s. So, I mean, is this a difference with modern readership?
It's a very good question.
That sort of,
Maybe it's evolved.
you know,
Maybe it's evolved. Yeah. Well, here, let's play a game a little bit, right? I'm going to go back to my beginning here. I'm going to have you just look at the photos, right? All I did to find these photos was I typed in Google successful book series, right? And these are the things that come up. We have City of Bones, right? If you've read The Mortal Instruments, that is a story that progresses, right? Each book builds on the next. Hunger Games, same thing. A Court of Thorns and Roses, this is a wildly popular series right now on Book Talk, right? But again, it's a story that evolves and moves forward as each individual book is progressing. So it's a series, right? It's something that's progressing forward. Same thing with the Twilight series, right? Those books build on each other. Harry Potter, we talked a little bit at length about that, right? But each story is a standalone, but it also contributes to that larger narrative. There's just Narnia, Panzer and Platter, Game of Thrones, right? Without a doubt, those absolutely build on each other, right? You can't easily hop into book 4, right, and know what's going on in a Game of Thrones. Lord of the Rings, right? Beginning from The Hobbit, Follow the Fellowship, right? Two Towers, Return of the King. You're progressing in the story. It's a series that develops. I'm giving away all my good stuff here, right? Yep. Okay, I think I got them all, right? But those are the examples that I found by just typing in successful book series. So again, like what you said, it's a very valid point. Maybe the model has changed in recent years, because book series today are a little bit more buildable on each other. And I would open that up to anybody else to respond to, too. Yeah, please.
I guess sometimes what can also maybe contribute to the series is that sometimes the character is so well written that even if there's not a book left at the end of the book, the reader will automatically want to know more
Yeah,
about
absolutely.
that person.
Mm-hmm.
And so that opens up the chance to write more
Mm-hmm.
on that character.
Absolutely, right. And I guess that's a decision, right, as your author of, is there another story to tell, right? And if that's the case, is it moving forward, right? Is future progressing? It's interesting that you said that you've read stories where the character doesn't age, right? That's a unique approach. I haven't read a story like that before, right? But I guess there's a couple of other varying options that you can consider. Yeah, very good points. Yeah, please.
I'm dying to know, what age is that person stuck at?
So the main character of the Stout Wolf books is Nero Wolf. He's very heavy and never leaves his house, and he's the detective. And he's probably in his 50s when it begins. I believe he's a First World War veteran.
Wow.
And it starts in the 30s, and the series ends in the 70s. And neither he nor the leg man, Archie Goodwin, they never age.
Interesting.
They're always roughly the same.
I think boomers all think that they think they never age.
It's an interesting thing to think. I honestly have never thought twice about it. When I think of a book series, I think of progression, but it's interesting that you point that out. I guess it's like watching some of the TV shows. I don't know if anybody here watches Family Guy. This is a terrible example, right? But that show's been on for how many seasons, right? 20 seasons or something like that. And those characters don't age either, right? It's the same thing over and over and over again. So I don't know. There's a market for it. Interesting thoughts, for sure. Okay. Well, just in the sake of time here, halfway over here, I'm going to continue. But please feel free to continue to ask questions. Let's have the dialogue. That's way more fun. Okay, number 4, right? I talked briefly about this already, but pantser versus a plotter. Raise your hand if you would consider yourself a plotter. You think through the story detail by detail, you outline, you know what's going to happen. And then where are my pantsers who say, I'm just going to go with it? Yeah, right? It's interesting to see there's always a split in the middle of the room, right? Who prefers what? And I'll tell you a secret, both are wonderful. Both are super fun to do. My first 6 books, plotter. 100% mapped everything out. Character arcs, what was going to happen, internal struggle, external conflict, what was that story going to look like from start to finish. And I just followed my outline all the way through. And then after my 6th book, I thought, I'm kind of over this. This is a little taxing and a little bit exhausting. And I'm going to let's just see what happens, right? So I'm in the middle of writing my 7th book right now, and I'm trying something completely new. It's a romantic suspense, and it's written in first-person POV, and the entire thing I have made up as I've gone along. And let me tell you how refreshing and fulfilling that process is. So I would highly recommend, even if you lean one way or the other, try it, right? Try something that's out of your comfort zone. You learn a lot from giving yourself that space to explore. For this purpose, though, if you're writing a book series, it's not going to work very well if you're just seeing how things play out, right? There are absolutely some things that you should probably think through, be very strategic, right? What is that overarching conflict going to look like? What are those links between each story? What is that character's arc? What kind of growth? What are those obstacles, right? What are some things that are going to happen? And then you can kind of plant your little Easter eggs, right, as you go along. So the more that you've given it a little bit of thought, I think the stronger the story is going to be on the opposite side. And there's nothing worse than finishing a draft going, oh, that's a big old plot hole in the middle, right? You don't want to have that feeling, right? So I would recommend, even if you're a pantser, which I totally appreciate now, try the plotting path. It's going to be a little bit more effective for you. All right, number 5, revealing backstories slowly, right? If you have a plan, right, for a book series, chances are you have one main character. Maybe you have 2, maybe you have 3, right? Whatever that looks like for your genre and your story. But in each individual book, I want you to think only about what your character wants. What is their goal? What do they want, right? Is it a love interest? Is it a new career, right? Is it to overcome some kind of physical challenge, right? Are they trying to win something, right? What do they want? Okay, that's what's going to happen in one single book. This is your main plot. But overarchingly, the collective series should identify why your character wants it. So differentiate those two, right? The single book is about what do they want? But the larger question is, why do they want it? So you give yourself a little bit of strategy, right, to really figure out what that character is, who they are, and what they want, and then really what that internal motivation is for them to actually achieve it. That's just one character. Depends how many characters you have, right? If you're writing from multiple POVs, you might have a couple of things that you need to figure out. What do they want? What's their purpose in the story? And then tell me why they want it over time. So revealing those backstories very slowly helps your reader understand why. Not just what, but why. Does that kind of make sense? It's not easy to do. I can tell you that from experience. It's very hard to figure out, and it's not something you can just write down in a single sentence. But give yourself a little bit of space to understand what that character desires most so you can progress in that story. Number 6, making secondary characters count. Chances are, right, it's going to be very difficult to carry through. We'll just say you're writing a 7-book series, right? Let's just, for an example, you're writing 7 books. You've committed to it, right? It's going to be kind of hard, right, to carry a reader through 7 books with the same character. It's totally something that can be done, right? I'm not saying it can't, right? But give yourself a little bit of flexibility to introduce new characters. What can those new characters do for your evolving story? Now, I'm going to use Lord of the Rings as an example. Are there other Lord of the Rings fans in this room? Committing to that or no? Hugely. Right. It's one of my favorite things in the world. I love Tolkien, right? So when I think of this particular example of why secondary characters matter, this is a great example. So when you start the Lord of the Rings, right, you start with the Fellowship of the Ring, you meet the 9, right, people in the Fellowship, right, and the story progresses. There is a quest, right? We are going to set out to Mordor, and we are going to destroy the ring, right? Now you get through, right, that first film, I'll use the films as an example here, right? And nothing has really happened at the end, right? The Fellowship has broken apart, and you can tell there's more story to come. But the story doesn't stop with just those 9 characters. It brings in so many new secondary characters, right? And it's what helps that film move forward. That second movie opens, right, in Rohan, and you have King Theoden, right? You have his niece and nephew. They're new characters that are introduced. And if you think about the overarching story that's being told, that story can't be told without those 3 new characters, plus several more. So my point here is to think strategically about what secondary characters can do to move your story forward, right? What's that evolution look like? What do they do to the plot? Maybe they're going to come in and mess it up a little bit and give your main character some conflict, right? But there's a purpose to those secondary characters. So what can they do to help move your story forward? Excuse me. All right, number 7. We're thinking about character arcs here. This is another tricky one, and it's something that I personally discovered along the way as I was writing a trilogy. Character arcs, you're going to have 2 of them, right? The first character arc is going to take place in the very first book. Who is your main character? What do they want? How are they going to achieve it? And what's going to get in the way? So like I was saying, right, you have 2 different character arcs that you're going to be working with. Your first arc is going to take place in that very first book, right? What does your character want? What's going to get in the way of how they accomplish it or how they get it, right? What's that goal? And then you have to think about what they do what happens internally once they've achieved that goal, right? You're taking them from start to finish. What do they want? What's their goal? What's going to get in the way of them getting that goal? And what do they learn from that process? That's all in one book. But since you're writing a series, you have an opportunity for that character to develop even more. So think through, how does that character change from book 1 to book 7? Maybe they get what they want in book 1, but what else? What else do they need to do to grow? What else do they need to do to evolve? And that's going to span another 6 books. So think very critically about character arc, because honestly, I think that's where powerful storytelling comes in, is what that person does to grow and achieve their goals. And it doesn't just have to happen in one book. It can be overarching throughout your entire series. So obviously, the more books you write, the more opportunity you have to grow that character, right? But when I write in 3s, my main character in book 1, they're still part of the story in book 3, and they still have more growing and more contributions to make throughout that process. So for what it's worth, think about your characters. How can they grow over time versus one individual book? Number 8, central events, right? And here's my Harry Potter example again, right? I'm sure there's more that we could work with, but it's just the perfect example for what I want to say. Each individual book that you write, each story that you tell, right? There has to be one main focus. What's that conflict that's taking place? What does that character want? Externally, what's coming at them? What's going to prevent them from getting it, right? There's one story. But in a series, again, you have more books to work with. You have more real estate. So think about, how is that going to develop over time? Each book will have an individual event, but they will all be related, and it'll culminate, right, in that final climax, right? So again, Harry Potter, it's a perfect example. Sorcerer's Stone, Chamber of Secrets, Prisoner of Azkaban, right? Goblet of Fire, Order of the Phoenix, Half-Blood Prince, Deathly Hallows, right? There's something specific that happens in each individual story that culminates in Voldemort's, spoiler alert, defeat, right? So again, each individual book, one specific thing happens, but they all play off of each other to fulfill that larger arc. Okay, number 9. I mentioned earlier that it is a very common pitfall, I think, in most TV shows in particular, but this absolutely happens in book series as well, the messy middle. The reader loses interest, right? There's something that happens in the middle of that series that just falls flat. How many of you know this guy? You familiar with this show? Dexter? Okay. This is one of the best TV shows I've ever seen through season 4. And they lost me after season 4, right? Just a brief overview, right? Okay, this is Dexter. He works in forensics at the Miami Police Department. That's his day job. He is a forensics blood spatter analyst. But at night, he's a serial killer, a vigilante, right? He takes out the people that the police can't get. He lives a double life, right? And there's all these things that come at him. This is the coolest character I think that's ever been written, right? He is complex as they come. And for about, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, that show was like peak amazing. And then it fell flat. And I lost interest, right? The character didn't grow. There wasn't enough excitement, right, for the reader or the watcher, the viewer, right, to continue on. And it got worse, and it got worse, and it got worse. And then it ended on just this stupid, terrible note, right? Like, I'm still disappointed, and this was like a decade ago, right? So I use Dexter as an example, right? It is something that I think if you mention it to anybody who watched the show, they'll go, oh yeah, that stupid finale, right? Dexter has a messy middle. You don't want to do that, right? So think about it as you're drafting your story. The most compelling thing that you have in book 1 needs to be equally as compelling in book 4 and 5, right? If people can't tell you what book 4 and 5 are about, there's your messy middle, right? So when I'm thinking about pitfalls, make sure it is equally compelling, that first, last, and the middle. And then number 10, tying it up in a bow. How many of you have watched Lost? You familiar with that TV show? Ooh, straight down, right? Okay, and it didn't really come back from it, right? No. Didn't come back from it. So disappointing, right? Okay, I share the sentiment, obviously, right? Hours and hours of questions and things, right, that came from season 1. You're like, wow, there's a polar bear on an island. And to this day, I want to know why there was a polar bear on an island. And I'll never know because they don't answer it. They did not tie the bow, right? So my point here is that in your story, if you inserted a question in book 1 and you never answered that question for a reader, I promise you they will bring it up. They will recognize it for what it is, a plot hole. So when you want to tie the bow, right, you're thinking about every single thing you introduced, every question, everything, right? Characters that came into the story, things that happened, incidents, whatever it might be. Think about it. Did you answer that question? Because I promise you, a reader is going to want to ask that question. And if you don't have a ready answer, you're kind of falling into that messy middle again, right? So number 10 is simply be very strategic. If you introduce something in book 1, wrap it up and make sure it's tied in a bow on that very final page of your final book. Yeah? Okay, excellent. Okay. Final thoughts here, right? Your success, it's not an easy process. I commend you all for having just an interest in trying to figure it out. It's one of the greatest challenges that I think that I've kind of given myself, and I love every minute of it. I've had lots of very frustrating days where I realized I have written myself into a corner and that's not going to work out, and why is that polar bear on page 4? Give yourself a little grace. It is absolutely a learning process. I am so not perfect at it, right? But it's something that gives your brain a little bit of a challenge day to day. So just think through it, right? There's a way to do it well. You see all these very successful series, right? There are things you can do to map it out. and give yourself a little bit of success up front. So that's what I offer for you today. I thought it was funny. I created my top 10 tips of just things that I've discovered along the way. And then as I was Googling to try to find some fun images here, I came across this graphic. They match up pretty well. I was pretty proud of myself. There's only a couple of things on here that didn't quite align with what I shared with you this evening. So for what it's worth, somebody else thought that they were good tips as well. So with that, I will go ahead and wrap it up, and I will just say thank you all so much for joining me this evening. I hope it was worth your time, and that you're walking out of this room with a couple tangible takeaways, that when you open up your document or you open your book and start to write, you have something that was of value this evening. So if you think of any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I love talking about this stuff. I think it's great fun. So if you have a question or you want to continue the conversation, here I am. Are there any questions that I can answer? Yes, please.
I just wondered, since you're going from, having it very plotted out to not plotted, is it hard?
I've definitely run into some hiccups, and I have discovered that even though I haven't created an outline and thought through everything, I'm always thinking about it. When I'm writing about insurance during the day, right? I'm thinking about how do I fix that? What can I do? So even though I haven't plotted it out on paper, I'm always thinking about my next couple chapters and how they progress in the story. So it's kind of like a hybrid approach, right?
I think it reflects life.
It does. Things come up that are not anticipated, right? Yeah, I think this is my one example, right? My one frame of reference, but the book I'm working on now is so much stronger than the work that I've produced so far. I don't know why, but having that flexibility to move the story in whatever direction is calling me, it made a difference. Yeah, try them both. They're lots of fun. Yeah.
So, having a full-time day job and writing on the side at night, once you have an agent and have that works under contract, do you have any challenges with like timelines and like making sure you got to the right goals and stuff?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's a really good question. Yeah, it becomes a lot more real when you sign your name on a piece of paper that says, I will produce this by this date. And I think that's what I struggled with too, was when I wrote my first book, it was all for fun. There was no timeline, there was no structure, it was just me making up stories. But then once I signed that first publishing contract, and my publisher at the time said, what's next? And I went, oh, I don't know, but let me figure it out. And very quickly I figured it out and signed another contract. And then the next question was, when are you going to do the third one? So then it became more of a struggle of I have to meet a deadline. And I'll be completely honest with you and tell you, in 2024, I will have released 3 books, which meant I wrote them all in 1 year. I do not recommend that. I lost the love for writing by the time I was writing that 6th book. I hope it doesn't show when people read it, but once you do have a date where you have to produce quality work, it does take the fun away. So I would definitely recommend don't do that to yourself. If it's something you honestly just enjoy and you're passionate about and want to do it for fun and creativity, don't set those deadlines and don't let people do it for you. People can wait, do it on your own time. Yeah?
So I gather that increasingly it's really important for authors to do social media and self-promotion.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I was wondering, in terms of the series, when you put the first book out, how much does reader feedback play into your writing or editing process for the second book?
Yeah, that's a really good question. What I try to do in advance is you got to have a significant amount of beta readers. Is everyone familiar with what a beta reader? Oh, okay, I'll define it just in case. When you're writing a story and you have completed a first draft, the best thing you can do is hand that story to another reader, a variety of readers, right? People you don't know who read the genre, people who you do know, right, but will be critical of your work, right? You want to have a variety of people that you can hand it to and say, here's what this book is. I anticipate it'll be a series, right? This is going to be a trilogy. This is book 2. Keep that in mind as you read. And you gather that feedback, ideally, before that first book even publishes. Now, sometimes it doesn't work that way, right? But ideally, if you're planning and mapping it out in advance, you can gather that feedback proactively before you even have a date on the calendar for that second book. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Do you generally then have a significant portion of the second book already?
Typically, yeah, typically. I find it's best to, once you finish one, you dive right into the next, just because it's all fresh, it's all still there. It may not stay, it might still just be a crummy first draft, but you're progressing. I never find a day where I'm not writing something. I think that's a valuable piece of advice that I was offered years ago. You're always doing something. It may not be working actively on a manuscript. It may be an editing day. It might be a social media day, right? There's always something you're actively doing to progress your work forward. Yeah, it's one thing I didn't understand when I was like, I'm going to write a book. You also have to sell that book. You have to sell that book. Nobody's going to do it for you, so I've discovered. You have to sell your book. So there's a million other things that I have figured out over time. How to build my own website, how to have a social media presence, how to build a YouTube page, right? I mean, there's a million other things that come with it after you've written a book. It's not just, oh, I'm going to find an agent or a publisher. They're not going to sell your book for you unless you're with one of the big 5. You might have some assistance, but you still are responsible for selling your book. This is a tough industry. Great question, though. Anything else?
You mentioned two arcs per character, right? The first one pertaining to the first book, and it's like, what does my character want? And then the overarching one that talks about the development.
Yes.
When it comes to your outlining, do you have that first arc already kind of handled?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What about the second arc once you're wrapped up?
Yeah, fabulous question, right? It's about character arcs and the 2 that you need, right, in a series. Typically, as I am mentally preparing to tell a story, I write down my characters' names and I build short profiles for them. And that part of that profile is always going to be, what does this character want? What is their purpose in the story? What do they want, right? And then I start to think about, how is that want or that desire going to be fulfilled? And what's going to get in the way that's going to help them grow, right? That's what a reader wants, is character growth. How are they going to change from page 1 to page 400? So I typically will think about that. For that single book, that's a lot easier. And then as you start to write and you become more familiar with the story and the other characters that are interacting with your main character, that helps me kind of figure out what their larger arc is going to be. So I don't think I know up front, but I think that particular arc will come to you more naturally once you're more familiar with the stories and the character. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so like, even for like a legitimate side character, like, I don't know, the main character's a more known sibling, and maybe they come out just a chapter or 2, you literally just have like a segment for them, and perhaps their growth is not at all.
Absolutely. There are, without a doubt, secondary characters that serve a single purpose, and if that's all that they're meant to do, that's all they're meant to do. I think of those as maybe more like spare characters. Secondary characters should enhance the story in some way. If you remove them completely, they're not necessary, right? The story could progress on its own without them. They're not needed characters. So the secondary characters have to be there to contribute something. Maybe it's conflict, maybe they question, right? But if they didn't have their presence in the story wouldn't be the same. So that's a true secondary character, is somebody who's going to still help the story move forward. Great questions. Anything else? Okay, lovely. Well, thank you all so much. I really appreciate you letting me just kind of chat with you for the last hour. I hope it was worthwhile for all of you, but thank you so much. I wish you a lot of success with your future works. Thanks.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. A big thank you to Julie. That was absolutely wonderful. So much helpful advice.
Good.
If you can join us, we'll be back down here on Wednesday, August 7th. That topic will be hooking your readers with local mystery author Molly McRae. So hope you can join us back for that one. Thank you for coming.